Okay, by my watch, it is 11 a.m. Mountain Time, and we are excited to get going on session 5 here of the Community Building Institute. Today we've got Roch Turner from Bitterroot College UM in sunny Hamilton, Montana, joining as our facilitator. Roch, among many other things in his career, is an AmeriCorps Vista alum who served with Campus Compact right at Bitterroot College a handful of years ago. So he's intimately familiar with the kind of work that those of you that are national service members are doing. He's also supervised Vistas, and I'm sure he'll talk about this as well. This stop in the process here, talking about strategic planning and plan implementation, is officially number 5 of the community building life cycle. And remember that this is really a wheel and not a line. So a lot of these things can, you can revisit as you go, thinking about how do we assess needs as part of a strategic planning process. Do we understand where things are at right now? So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Roch Turner.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Hope you guys can all see me. I'm actually situated in a room right next to Early Head Start. So from time to time, you might hear some kids screaming and playing. Don't be alarmed. They're fine. I'm not sure how much you all know about me. I'll just give you a little bit of a quick breakdown on who I am. I'm from Montana. I left for the Navy right out of high school, spent 6 years in the Navy as a shipboard intelligence analyst, then a signals intelligence analyst for NATO. Came back, started a small company that I ultimately sold. Went to school forever, and then got a call from the director of Bitterroot College one night at about 9 o'clock and said, I have this job that you might be interested in. The only thing is it doesn't pay anything. And so, of course, I said, let me hear more. I looked it up. It was an AmeriCorps Vista position. I immediately told her I wanted in on it. Spent a year as a Vista. And then the Bitterroot College hired me on. That was 5.5 years ago. And I've just recently accepted a position as a senior research fellow for a privately funded nonprofit. So I'll actually be leaving the Bitterroot College on June 30th this summer and moving into this new position in the nonprofit world. I'm pretty excited about. Today, we're going to talk about something even more exciting. We're going to talk about the strategic planning process. So I've got this little chat box here, and I don't have anybody who's said anything. So if you guys can just throw in there, those of you that have participated in a strategic planning process before, let me know via the chat box. And if you have any questions throughout the process, shoot me a question. I'll be trying to keep track of the chat box, but sometimes I get carried away because I get so excited about strategic planning. I lose my concentration and everything else. So cool. I see there's a few people that have. Well, one person that has, one person that has not. If you're going to be a part of the nonprofit world, odds are, or a government agency, odds are you're going to be engaged in a strategic planning process at some point. Largely, the information that I'm using for today's presentation is based on a guy named Bryson, who's considered the seminal author on strategic planning for nonprofits. Now, it's important to note that there's a lot of different ways that we can engage in strategic planning. So if you're currently in part of a process or have done this process in the past or about to start the process and it's slightly different than what I talk about today, don't be too concerned. This is not the end-all, be-all, dead set strategic planning process. This is just kind of broadly known as the most accepted means of achieving a strategic plan in the nonprofit sector. So again, if you have any questions as we cycle through this, feel free to shoot them out on the chat. I'm going to try to watch it, and I'm hoping to be about 50 minutes or so to give us 10 minutes for question and answer. I also am available via email or phone, and you can get my information from the Campus Compact, or I'll give it to you at the end if you have any questions throughout your time in America. So, all right, AmeriPals, Let's do it. So the introduction here, the strategic planning, it's really imperative for all organizations. Organizations have to know where they're going, have to know how they're going to get there, what the plan of attack is going to be, and that's what the strategic plan is in a nutshell. And without a plan, it's like the old adage, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. The strategic plan is the way that we get to where we want to be. It's essentially this organizational focus. As an organization, what is it that we're doing and what processes are we going to put in place to get to where we want to be in the future? And it's this clear vehicle for long-range plans. It's something that you can take off the shelf or go to a folder and open it up on your computer and see very clear steps for what your role is in the organization, what other people's roles are in the organization, and where the organization's going in general. If it's implemented correctly, it's going to save a ton of time and money. And that's critical. If you're working in the nonprofit or government sector, you probably know that money is tight. Even though we're in an unprecedented economy right now where everybody seems to be making money, the nonprofit world and the government agencies are struggling for funding. And so the strategic plan really gives us an opportunity to be more efficient and more effective with our mission and our goals for the organization. But in order to do that, we have to have this initial framework. We have to have something that's tangible that we can really get our hands on moving forward. Solid work in place, it becomes this building block for the next steps. It's a foundation. These things can evolve. It's not a document that needs to be rigid for 5 years and then in 5 years you move on. These things need to be revisited frequently, but it really gives us a strong foundation and these building blocks that we can move forward with a clear understanding, organizational understanding, both as individuals and as the group of individuals that make up the organization. It requires us to really closely examine who we are, where we're going. Sometimes you'll find stakeholders that are still holding on to the past, or they have a different vision for the future. And this process is going to help bring all of those different notions together and solidify what the organization agrees upon. It's a disciplined effort. It's got to be a disciplined effort. And it's a set of actions that guide and shape the organization. So again, Bryson, 1995, that's 20 years ago, but still Bryson is considered the seminal author on strategic plans for nonprofits. Strong communication is critical in all aspects of work. We need to communicate as frequently as possible and as clearly as possible. This allows for accountability, and it enhances these ongoing learning experiences and develops participation amongst everybody. One of the critical components of a strategic plan is that we have to be in communication, and every single person has to be involved in the strategic plan so that we know exactly what we're doing. It's really this map that we can take off the shelf at any time. Some important considerations for the strategic plan. Again, communications play a critical role. We need to inform everybody. We need to be motivated. We should all be motivated with what we're doing. If you're not motivated by what you're doing, sometimes it's good to step back and kind of re-examine why you're doing it. And then we really want to be inclusive. We want to involve everybody. It's an integral part of the decision-making process. So this open dialogue and idea formulation, really, again, it requires this communication. We have to be able to collaborate and discuss what we're doing, why we're doing it. And from the beginning of the process, all stakeholders should be involved, and there's accountability and responsibility for everybody that's involved in the process and everybody that's involved in the organization. Not always is everybody involved in the organization involved in the strategic planning process, depending on the size of the organization. As organizations are smaller, they tend to be more inclusive of all of the stakeholders. Larger organizations tend to have representatives from each group of stakeholders. So before you actually write the plan, you have to write the plan, get ready to get ready, so to speak. The initial plan will focus on the steps required for success. Obviously, the point of this is to be successful, make the organization more successful. Otherwise, why would you do it? The roles and functions need to be described and implemented, and a commitment to the plan of action oriented focus. It focuses on achieving the best between the organization and its environment. All organizations are a product or well, yeah, product of circumstances, I guess you can say. Our environment, whether it's our political environment, our fiscal environment, our geographic, cultural environment, that's going to play a role in how our organization moves forward. And so we need to be mindful of what that environment entails. What is it about our environment, the ecosystem that we operate in, that will help us succeed or potentially result in barriers or obstacles throughout the way. And this organizational purpose has to mirror the values and encourage direction. So our purpose, each organization has its own culture and it has its own values. And our mission, our purpose statement really should mirror that. It should be pretty clear. Our purpose and our vision, there should be a dovetail there. Okay, so mission, vision, and values. There's a couple of different ways that people discuss the mission and vision and the values, and they can seem relatively similar, but they're not synonymous with each other. The mission statement represents a shared vision and values. So we are meant to do something. We have a purpose, this organization, and we're engaging to meet that purpose based on the values that we have and our vision for the future. And all stakeholders have to be involved in the process again. So if Roch comes in and says, this is what I think the values are, and I don't include anybody else, I could be completely off the mark because I don't have that collective thinking or the collective good in mind necessarily. I'm going to focus on areas of organizational success. Ultimately, we want the organization to be successful, of course. And I'm going to make sure that board, administration, staff, community, everybody that potentially could have an input on what we're doing, that they're involved. An effective mission statement is going to deal with these human needs, the economics, relationships, growth, and spirit. Most organizations tend to have a desire to grow to a certain point. It's kind of in the business world, a lot of people talk about stagnation being the death of a business. In nonprofit and government world, it's really about growth in services, growth in achieving stakeholder needs, growth in the values and vision of the organization and how it can kind of evolve based on this environment. Relationships, of course, critical to everything in life, but certainly to organizations. We have to have good, solid relationships, the economics of where we are. Like I said, right now we're in this unprecedented economy where a lot of people are doing really well financially, but that has an impact on how nonprofits are being funded and how the government is funding agencies. And so we have to be mindful of that. And if the economy does start to take a downturn, that's going to change how we operate in the world. And then just the spirit of what we're doing. Why are we here? That mission statement is what we're doing. It's what we're meant to do. Our mission, this organization, is in place specifically to do this thing. The vision statement is different. The vision is kind of, in a perfect world, if we achieve our mission, this is what it would look like. So our vision of the future is this scenario that we can achieve based on carrying out our mission. It's going to create a picture and be a statement of the desired future, right? Best case scenario, this is what the future looks like if we're able to carry out our mission. The effective vision statements are going to communicate the vision. That seems probably obvious, but we need to be clear communicators in writing this vision statement. They're relatively short. They're a couple sentences. On occasion, you'll see them as big as a paragraph or a paragraph and a half, but that gets pretty cumbersome. And that's not necessarily where you want to go with your vision. So you want to clearly communicate what the vision is, focus on the specific elements. If we achieve our mission, these are the specific things that will happen. Our mission is to alleviate poverty. And so our vision is to live in a world where people don't experience poverty. Right? Be trustworthy and show trust in others. Use the vision to help make decisions and solve problems. I'm not going to talk about it much today, but there's something called mission creep, where people tend to lose sight of what their original mission was because of enticing endeavors or what have you that lead them down the road of doing other work that's not necessarily tied directly to their mission. And so regularly being engaged and making our decisions based on our vision and our mission will help alleviate the risk of mission creep. And we're going to communicate the vision constantly to everyone involved. This is what we're here to do. we sometimes lose sight of what we're meant to do throughout the day, or just the day-to-day grind and the frustrations that come with things, or being sidetracked by different things. And so we have to be able to constantly communicate, this is what we're here to do, so let's do it. For leaders, and I don't want to confuse leaders with supervisors, because that's not always the case, although supervisors should be leaders. But on occasion, leaders are people at the bottom of the echelon, so to speak, and those leaders in the organization need to promote a positive culture. Positivity is everything, especially in nonprofits and government work, where things can get a little, we can get kind of down on our luck, so to speak. And so we need to promote a positive culture, promote a safe, efficient, and effective environment. Efficiency and effectiveness, that's a fine line. It's kind of a balancing act. Efficiency, you're trying to get there as soon as you can, but you might get there quickly and not have been effective in the process. Or you could be effective, but it takes far too long to get the thing done. And so efficiency and effectiveness is a really, really difficult balancing act in the nonprofit and governmental sector. But we have to be mindful, nonetheless, of how we maintain efficiency and effectiveness. And of course, safety, just in life in general, we should be as safe as possible. And this is in order to promote the success of all the stakeholders involved. Everybody that's involved in our organization has a vested interest in our success, and we want to make sure that everybody benefits and has a chance to take part in that success. We want to be collaborative with families and community, the people that we're meant to serve. We need to collaborate with them and bring them in on our strategic planning process. So if your mission is to alleviate poverty, just as an example, and you bring everybody in except for the actual stakeholders that you're meant to serve, you may be missing some things that you shouldn't miss. And then we need to act with integrity, fairness, and of course these things. I think you're all AmeriCorps members, so I think you all know about being moral and ethical. Okay, so now we need to start gathering some information, actually put this strategic plan together. You'll find in terms of length, there's no standard format. You can get templates, but there's not one template that works the best or is the worst. But you can go online and find templates for strategic plans anywhere. I'll just Google strategic plan template. So they can be as long or as short as you'd like. I would say that it probably isn't the best to create an 8-volume strategic plan, because people will lose sight in all those details. But it can be short, it can be long, but it's got to have these kind of key components. And so this third phase of the strategic planning process is collecting data. We're going to assess the strategic plan environment by reviewing the organization's history and accomplishments. So we just talked about this mission, vision, values, and guiding principles. We need to constantly be evaluating whether or not those the mission, vision, and values are still applicable in the current environment. Are any of you serving at a host site that has not established mission or vision statement? And I'll give a few minutes for you to chat. Hope you don't mind me drinking coffee. I really like coffee, and it's sunny now, and so I've got iced coffee. So I got one respondent that says no, or I guess technically panelist is what you're referred to on this thing. So then if you're all working at organizations that actually have established mission and vision statements, I would encourage you to go back and look at those mission and vision statements, and then be somewhat critical when looking at the organization to determine whether or not you're actually experiencing mission creep, or if the organization is remaining true to the mission and vision. That's part of this review of the organization's history. But also, in addition to the mission and vision, you're going to look at the kind of the broader picture of the organization history. How did the organization come about? What did its founding members have in mind when it was created? What did the community have in mind when it was created? And how has it evolved over time and ended up where it is today. You need to assess the internal and external environments as well. So we have these organizational cultures that are established over time. Rarely are they deliberate. They tend to be more of an organic organizational culture. Although in some cases they seem pretty deliberate. But people in the organization are going to be there's going to be happy and positive people, and there's going to be not so happy and negative people, and there's going to be some folks who are a little more toxic that are really negative about what's going on in the organization, and others that are pie in the sky, everything's rainbows and butterflies. The organization could not be doing any better if it tried. And all of those different perspectives of the organization creates this organizational culture. And that's that internal environment that we need to be mindful of. But then the external environment includes how people perceive our organization. How do the people that we're serving think of our organization? How do other people that work in the same sector as us or partners in industry or service partners, how do they see our organization? Political environment, financial environment. What are all of the components that could potentially impact both positive and negative our organization? And what works well and what needs improvement? Are there areas of improvement? A good rule of thumb, there's always room for improvement. But what are the areas that we're also doing really well in? It's important to acknowledge all of these different components. We're going to start gathering data to guide our decision making. And so all of the relevant internal data about the organization, such as our budget, our work performance metrics, need to be assessed. Professional development and technology infrastructure. How many of you have work in an organization that have work performance metrics that's clearly laid out, that you've seen the performance metrics, you know exactly what's expected of you because it's on paper in writing? How many of you wish you had that? Good. So some of you have it. Some of you wish that you had it. This type of work can sometimes feel like what we're doing is a bit nebulous. That there's no clearly defined process for understanding whether or not my performance is on par or not. And this is part of the strategic planning process. If there's no worker performance metrics in place that you can actually put your hands on or pull up on your computer, it's time to talk about what it means to perform well in the organization. That's the type of stuff that needs to be assessed. Professional development. If you don't have access to professional development, I would ask for it. I think there's really two types of professional development in this line of work. There's the type of professional development that makes you a better asset for the organization. So you can engage in professional development that will directly relate to you performing better in the workplace. But then there's also professional development that makes you a better candidate for where you hope to be in the future. And we should all be engaged in these types of professional development. We need to be of more use for the organization that we work for, and we also need to be mindful of where we intend on being in the future and how we can gain the skills necessary to get to that point. So these professional development opportunities should be clearly defined, and if not clearly defined, there should at least be some understanding of how each individual can pursue professional development. Technological infrastructure, of course, is an interesting time right now because technology is moving so quickly that some organizations are up on top of it and they're not having any trouble maintaining that technological relevance, but others might be a little bit behind, and that can cause us some performance problems. And of course, budgetary information. If you guys have enough money to do what you need to do, you don't need to respond to this, but good question to ask yourself is, can we actually meet our mission based on the budget that we have, or are we hamstrung by our financial situation? So once you've gathered this internal data, then you're going to start looking at the external data. Political issues, of course, right now we live in a pretty unique time politically, both in the state of Montana and nationally. The government is different than it was 4 or 5 years ago, and so the political atmosphere is going to impact how we do things and how people view us, and we're finding a lot of contention now in the government. And so how does that contention, how does these stressors and the tension that exists in the political sphere, how does that impact our organization? How does the economy impact our organization? What are the social factors at play? There's cultural issues that are going to make a difference. What is the culture of the area that you're serving? There's a concept of a cultural identity hypothesis that includes looking at the geography of the area in which you serve and identifying different cultural aspects that are specific to the geography of where you serve. That'll give you a better understanding of how people view your organization. So what is the political landscape? What is the landscape of the past, and how has that impacted folks in your area? In the South, they have a pretty significant and specific past that impacts how they make sense of these global forces. In Montana, Missoula is a different place than, say, Ennis, right? And so we need to kind of understand how our geographic area views what we're doing in terms of social and cultural impacts. We're going to conduct a SWOT analysis, and this can be a lengthy process, and it should be iterative. The SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I like to kind of quarantine people during the SWOT analysis into a room for hours at a time so that we can really have a good conversation, get some coffee, get some snacks, lock the door, start talking about what our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. And it's as simple as having a whiteboard, having the 4 categories, and let people talk and take notes of what they have to say. Strengths in the organization are going to vary. Weaknesses in the organization are going to vary. And opportunities and threats are going to emerge based on those strengths and weaknesses. And we need to be able to clearly understand what those entail. And then leave the room, let a week or 2 go by, and come back, revisit that SWOT analysis. Make this an iterative process so that we can really have time to think about what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are of our organization. Because really, this in a nutshell is these are the nuts and bolts of why we do what we do and why we may not get to where we expect to be, even if we're following our mission to a T. How many of you have participated in the SWOT analysis? Has anybody been through one of these at the organization you're at now or in the past? How long was it? It takes forever. It does take forever. Yeah, so 6 months. I don't usually take 6 months for a SWOT analysis. Yeah, a week-long in-depth analysis. That a week-long makes sense. You can get a little tired. Sometimes leaving the SWOT analysis and returning a week or 2 later is a good way to let us kind of mull over what we've talked about and really think about things a little bit more critically. 6 months is lengthy. I've never taken 6 months. I usually try to hold it to about 2 weeks or so and have people consider what the different components are, communicate with me in between the sessions, and then when we meet, like I said, it's a closed door, a meeting with all the stakeholders or representatives of the stakeholders, so that we can have a long conversation about the SWOT analysis. It's a guide for future communication strategies, so that when people say, "Why are you doing this?" we can say, in the SWOT analysis, this is a weakness that emerged, and we're trying to alleviate this weakness. We're trying to turn this weakness into a strength, or this is a strength that emerged, and we want to capitalize on that strength and use that strength to help us moving forward. So the SWOT analysis, this is kind of a non-compromising part of the strategic planning process. We have to engage in the SWOT analysis. I've got all this data collected during the SWOT analysis, and we have to make strategic decisions for the organization. And then we need to articulate those strategic issues, engage the organization's readiness for change. Have you, and you don't have to answer this, but in your mind, I want you to think about whether or not you've worked with somebody who just flat does not like change, whether stated or through actions. They just say, you know what, change is not my bag. I want things to stay the same forever. This is part of your organization's readiness for change and willingness to actually make the change, because not everybody is going to be cool with the outcomes of your strategic plan. But because we've engaged all of the stakeholders, we'll have this collective good that we're moving toward. So organization's readiness to change is critical. And then this ability to articulate the strategic issues through our strategic plan is also critical. So anybody that says, what are the things you're facing, both good and bad, you can hand off this document. These strategic issues are the organizational goals and objectives that the plan will attempt to address. We've got our mission, we've got our vision that tells us what we're doing and what we hope to achieve. And so what are the goals along the way that we're going to set so that we can ultimately meet this vision? And what are the objectives throughout the process? We have to keep this organizational readiness for change in mind. If we're in an organization that just doesn't have a clear readiness for change, the culture might be very negative, but all the stakeholders involved recognize that there's a need for change. Sometimes some tough decisions have to be made. I don't know how many of you are in the western side of the state, but the University of Montana is going through this very process right now. The organization clearly has a need for change because enrollment is down, and the change that's being made, not everybody is thrilled by it. And so there has to be some sort of balance between how we engage with these people who aren't ready for change and those that understand that we necessarily have to make those changes. And then we have to incorporate these elements of change theory into the planning process. So we analyze internal stakeholders' roles. Each person inside the organization, what exactly is their role, and how does this help us make the changes necessary? And are those roles suited for the individual personalities and the position responsibilities? So is there a role in your organization that really requires the person filling the role to be a change agent, but it's not a change agent, it's somebody who doesn't really have a taste for change? Or do you have the right person in the position that says, yeah, I'm ready to champion this thing and get us moving down the road in the right direction? And that change theory, the opportunity for us to actually make the transition into the organization that we want to be, that's a pretty critical component of this process. Compile this data we collected throughout the SWOT analysis, and we address the school readiness, that should just say organization readiness for change. And we keep in mind any relevant administrative, financial, governance priorities that are going to impact our organization throughout the change. So you should have bylaws, you should have articles of incorporation if it's a nonprofit that you can review and say, you know what, actually we have some issues with governance that are going to cause us problems, and so we need to regroup on the bylaws. We have these financial issues that may or may not help us make the change that we want to make. So all of this stuff needs to be taken into account for the completion of phase 4, when we actually write the strategic plan. Anybody have any questions so far? All right. Well, then it's time to create the strategic plan. So we've got all kinds of data, all kinds of information. We've included all of our stakeholders. We're ready to create a strategic plan. But once the core future strategies are decided and the priorities are set, then we can start actually making goals and objectives. That's how we make this plan happen, right? Like I said earlier, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. But a plan isn't just a goal. A plan is how we achieve the goal. So we're looking at these long-term strategic objectives and show that they provide a high-level view of items between where we are today and that future state and then broken down in a balanced way. So we need to say, this is where we want to be. And these are all of the little steps that we're going to take to get to that point. These are, I mean, this is a big project. This is a big process that sometimes is going to be 5 to 7 years long. And we have to be able to break that down into manageable bite-sized chunks so that it's a little bit easier to do. Like a marathon, you don't start the marathon thinking about the end. You start the marathon thinking about each little step along the way and what your strategy is. And that's what this planning process is meant to do. Goals we need to take into consideration, financial issues. I can't stress this enough. If we say we're going to do this thing, it's really lofty, but we don't take into account that we don't have any money, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So I run a nonprofit that works with young kids, and we need to have a van to take the kids someplace. And so my goal is to have the van, but we don't have any money for it. What's the point of having that goal if I'm not going to address that financial issue? What are my customer concerns? I'm serving a group of people, I being the organization. We're serving a group of people, and those customers, those clients, whatever you'd like to call them, those stakeholders have their own concerns, their own issues that they're concerned with that we need to take into account when serving those stakeholders. What does it mean to have operational excellence if we're going to be excellent at what we do? How do we define that? And then people, as we have in long-term strategic objectives, these are big. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I just got a note that said my internet's unstable. That's not good. If you guys still have me, can you just type in anything in the chat box? Okay, good. But it's lagging a bit. Okay. Yeah, I've never got that notification before that my internet's unstable. Well, okay, I'll just keep going. We'll hope for the best. So these long-term strategic objectives, we're really looking for 7 or fewer because these are big goals and objectives. Clear long-term objectives, short-term goals can be identified, and those short-term goals should be defined using the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So we have these big objectives, this 5, 6, 7 objectives that we know we want to achieve in the next 5 years. How are we going to get there? We're going to get there through a series of very short goals that are they're specific. Who's going to do them? What are they? When are they going to be done? We're going to be able to measure whether or not we were successful. So once we've worked on the goal, what does it mean to be successful? Actionable, they have to be something we can actually do. We need to be able to carry the thing out. Realistic, all of this should really be a realistic plan. We don't want to be, this is not a place for pie in the sky, just dream for the best. This is a plan to get someplace, so it needs to be realistic and time bound. You need to be able to say, this goal is due on June 1st. These are the things we're going to do to achieve that goal on June 1st. So the short-term goals, there's going to be a lot of short-term goals, but each one of those goals leads to one of our long-term objectives. We arrange on a year-to-year basis. This kind of depends on the organization and what the type of planning process it is. Year-to-year is fine, but they really shouldn't be much more than a year long. I actually prefer month-to-month up to a year. Sometimes there'll be 6-month goals, 1-month goals, but I like those really short-term goals that are very, very specific. Even if it's us dividing other goals into smaller goals so that we can achieve that longer objective, we really need these very, very small goals that we can measure throughout the process. So try not to go over a year. Goals that are with milestones that are due a year, 2 or 3. So much happens in the organization 2 years, 3 years from now that it can be really challenging to maintain those goals. With long-term and short-term goals established, then we can start looking at the financial impact. Again, financing is everything. Do we have the money to do what we need to do? And so we can look at those goals, like I said, they're measurable, they're realistic, these long-term objectives. We know that they're going to cost money. They're going to take manpower. It's going to maybe take technology. It's going to take infrastructure, what have you. There's money involved. And so managers, the people that are leading this project, they should really get their best market projections on the cost of each goal, and then take into consideration how our finances are going to adjust over time. Are we heavily reliant on grants that may or may not come in? Do we expect maybe some sort of user fee that our organization implements to increase or decrease over time? All of these types of considerations are necessary so that you can actually determine whether or not you're capable of achieving these goals or not. Good financial assessment is going to make allowances for a number of external forces. A lot of these external forces should have been identified during the SWOT analysis. Political forces, if we have a general election coming up and we might have a change in political power or even during the midterms. For most of us working in nonprofit and government work, it makes a difference which party has the power, because the two parties that generally have control have different philosophies on how they should fund nonprofits or not fund nonprofits, and the same goes with government organizations. So if you have a midterm election coming up, of course, none of us can predict what's going to happen in these elections. We can give it our best guess, but none of us know for sure. And we just need to be mindful of how that can impact our financial situation. And that's just one example of the volatility of our fiscal situation working in this type of sector. At this point, the actual plan is assembled. It's some recommendations for future events. Each of the goals, defined goal is assigned to a person, so we know who's working on what, when they're working on it. Once it's due, what do they move on to next? This is a very, very clear roadmap of how we move forward. This step requires the approval of key members of the organization. Of course, all the stakeholders have to be involved. So as we write this plan and create the plan using all of the data, that should add relevance to what we're doing, and it should make it trustworthy, so that we bring the stakeholders in, we put the plan together, everybody understands and is on the same page. And while we may have some subtle disagreements throughout the process, the collective has really decided what the plan is going to look like. So everybody's on board, everybody understands what they're going to do. And by everybody, I mean everybody. All members of the organization have a very clear understanding of what to do when and how to do it. And at the end of this 5, you have this final product complete. You have a strategic plan on your hands. So you should be feeling pretty good, because now you've got this document, whether it's in a 3 by, you have to implement the plan. We're talking about a 5 to 7 year plan, preferably closer to 5 years. So you've gone through, put the thing in place. Any questions so far on just the fastest rundown of how to create a strategic plan in AmeriCorps history? All right. Well, let's talk about how to implement this thing. Oh, a review. It requires the organization to closely examine who they are and where they're going. It's a discipline effort to produce these. Is it possible for you to plug into the Ethernet cord? So I'm plugged in directly, so I'm not sure what's going on with my internet. Does everybody still have me? That's frustrating. Let's take a pause for just a moment. Let me see what I can do.
Hey folks, we'll see what we can do with the video. It's working about 80% of the time, I'd say, Roch. just in that last kind of spiel, there were some spots where it kind of like audio cut out and you paused. So it might just be like heavy traffic, a lot of people using, working right now at the college.
Okay. Well, we'll just keep going. We're kind of closing in on the end of it now. So we'll move through it and get into the question and answer stage, and then that'll be mostly chat. I hope so. Okay, so let's see here. It says disciplined effort, and then we have this organizational purpose statement, our mission and vision. This is what we're doing. This is where we hope to go. We've created a mission and vision statement. We've gone through the SWOT analysis. We've determined our organization is ready for change. We've created goals and objectives, both long-term and short-term. We've lined everything out, exactly what we're doing. We're getting dangerously close here. With the appropriate approval from leadership and stakeholders, acceptance of the change for each short-term goal, we can assess, and our managers and staff can identify our role in the change and recognize the time limits for each objective. This is what we're going to do. These are all these little things we're going to do that are going to ultimately result in our success with these long-term objectives. Changes needed for success are identified at the lower level, so it's possible to create these discrete department level plans to trigger the intended changes. Everybody down to the so to speak, the employee with the least amount of responsibility still understands what their role is. No plan is complete if you don't talk about how you're going to execute the plan. To that end, everyone in the organization needs a clear action plan. Everybody has access to an action plan, so they know that they're a piece of the overall plan and what they're responsible for day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, so on and so forth. And another thing this does is if you have attrition in the workplace, which is inevitable, it gives the person that's coming in and filling the role this clearly defined goals and objectives that they can use to make better sense of their new position. Or if somebody within the organization moves into a different role, again, it gives them a document that they can refer to, helps them understand what they're doing. And we need to determine groups that are going to meet and talk about these strategies. So each of these goals there's individual goals and objectives and strategies, but those individuals are part of a bigger ecosystem. And so what are the smaller groups within the organization that need to meet frequently to have a better understanding of how to communicate moving forward? At the end of this phase 6, the final product will be these annual plans or action plans for departmental or individual level. Each person, each group, each department throughout, getting bigger and bigger. Everybody knows exactly what they're meant to do, and they have clear points that they can come back and regroup and say, yes, we've actually achieved the goal, or no, we haven't achieved the goal. The PowerPoint induced coma. Hopefully you're all with me right now, especially with the lags. We need to be able to evaluate and monitor this strategic plan, and there's a few things that really are going to work against us if we don't take it into account ahead of time. There's really four broad categories that will result in failure of a strategic plan. The first is insufficient resources. If during the strategic planning process we haven't taken into account what our resources are, and we've been not real with ourselves about our resources, and then we try to implement the plan and we don't have the resources to actually implement what we said we were going to do, that's obviously going to cause a problem. This is something that, as the people that have participated in the strategic planning process, we have direct control over. We can take considerations of resources as we're making the plan. That's something that we should be mindful of. And this type of failure is really the failure of those that are creating the plan. Circumstances changes, on the other hand, that can be out of our control. So whether we lose funding that we're expecting, we have a political shift at the local, state, or federal level, different organizations that come in and compete. There's a lot of different circumstances that could change, that impact whether or not our strategic plan is is effective. And if we have some of those changes in circumstances, we have to be able to come back together as a group of stakeholders and review our strategic plan to see how we can address those changes in circumstance. Another thing that we have direct control over is this having too many policies to maintain. So if we've created a strategic plan that implements far too many policies to actually manage and maintain, the thing's eventually going to fizzle out. Right? We can't have an 8-volume strategic plan with policies that are rigid, that are inflexible as time goes on. The plan will ultimately fail. And then the shift in environment that's similar to circumstances changing, but it's out of our control. So as the environment shifts one way or another, we have to be nimble and we have to be willing and able to move with the environmental changes that our organization is faced with. We're going to evaluate our strategic plan and our planning process by asking some questions. Does our strategic plan guide short and long-term planning? Can we look at the strategic plan and say, yes, these are the short-term goals that I need to achieve. These are the long-term goals that I need to achieve. And the strategic plan gives me a roadmap. Are there resources allocated and organized for each area of the plan? Do we have the effective resources? Like I said earlier, if we don't have the resources necessary, it's going to be hard to achieve our goals. Is it easily understood by people who are not involved in the process? So a stakeholder comes in that maybe a new board member or a new employee that's not intimately involved in the strategic plan. Can I hand a plan off to them and will they understand it? Is it clearly articulated and simply put enough for anybody to look at the strategic plan and understand? And does it take into account the needs for these for the organization's direct and indirect factors, both internal and external issues that might impact our organization? Is the plan a product of collaboration among committee members? Has everybody involved been a part of the strategic planning process? I said at the beginning, you have to have all the stakeholders involved, otherwise the thing is just not going to be successful. Has it been adopted by all board members? Is everybody that's involved in this process, have they all said, okay, I may disagree with different components, but I'm on board, I'm with you, let's get this thing done? And then do the yearly plans meet the following measures? Staff developed and implemented. Staff has to be involved in this thing. This can't be a top-down push. It can't be a bottom-up push. Everybody needs to be involved. So staff has to have taken part in developing and implementing the plan. Can it be easily implemented, monitored, referenced? Is there a 3-ring binder that anybody can just take off the shelf at any time? Does each yearly plan operate under this strategic plan? It should, right? As we decide what we're doing throughout the weeks, months, and year, we should be taking into account our strategic plan. And then is it a realistic plan to meet the needs of the organization? Is the plan. So we're going to be reviewing this thing every year, right? Frequently. Is the plan still relevant to our current circumstances? And if not, then we make the adjustment. We've done so much upfront work that it's much easier year to year to make the adjustments necessary. And are we evaluating the needs of the process that are crucial into further developing it and following the plan? So what do we need to do to make these changes so that the strategic plan helps us achieve success? Who does the monitoring? One person from each area of the plan should be assigned to monitor, to constantly be paying attention to the strategic plan and whether or not everybody involved is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Are we meeting these goals, these short-term goals? Are we on track for meeting the long-term objectives? And we should come together once a year as a team to discuss this strategic plan and whether or not the last year was successful. Had we made some mistakes or overlooked some things in the strategic plan? What's working, what's not working? And then again, we understand that this is a roadmap into uncharted territory. We don't know what's going to happen a year from now. There's no way for us to know, and we have to be mindful of that. And so is this a roadmap that we can feel comfortable going into this, into these unknowns with, having done the research that we've done to the extent that we've done it? Now, I've got some resources on here that you all can look at. I'm pretty sure you have access to the PowerPoint after we're done. So if you're just thinking, man, I'd love to read that 1,200-page book by Bryson written in 1995, the references are here for you. But that's the end of the slide. I went a little long. Hopefully I still all have you connected. So if you have any questions, shoot them at me via chat. So I think most organizations should have a strategic plan that's this intensive. I'll give you an example. It's probably easier to give you an example of an organization that doesn't need one this extensive. So I sit on a board for a local skate park. We're going to build a skate park in my town, and we went through a strategic planning process, but it wasn't to this extent because the bylaws of this board state that once the skate park is built, it is taken over by the city and the board dissolves, and we walk away from it. And we had planned on the process being 2 years or less to begin with, and so this would be far too much for what we plan on doing. But if you have an organization that intends on going on for years and years to come, whether it's an institution of higher education, an institution that's addressing social or cultural issues, but it's a long-term organization, your strategic plan really should be this intensive, and it should be something that's evolving, so that once it's done, it's just regularly revisiting the strategic plan and making updates that are necessary. It's the upfront work that's really a challenge. So I'm going to give you, well, if I can get on, I'm going to give you guys my email address. If you guys have questions, you can feel free to email me. Even though I'm leaving my current role at the Bitterroot College, I do teach graduate school at the University of Montana, and I'm going to continue to do that, which means that this email address will be valid for some time to come. So if you guys have questions, actually I might have done that privately. Sorry, I got to go to all panelists. There we go. If you guys have questions, navigating the strategic planning process, you have a question about resources or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email. Just give me some context. I'm an AmeriCorps board member at such and such site, and I was on the CDI training series, and this is my question, and I'll gladly help in any way that I can. So if there's no more questions, I think we're right at an hour, 58 minutes. Yep.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Roch. And yep, everybody got that email. And if you lose that, don't hesitate to just shoot it to me. Shoot me a note, and I'll connect you with him. So we'll see you on Thursday. And just a reminder, that session happens at 1 p.m. It's our only one that's not at 11 a.m. Mountain. So that's our final session this Thursday with Kate Chapin, looking at evaluation. And we look forward to having you on that. Thanks again.